Anyway, if you're going to be here, hope to see you.
Okay. Hey, Mike. Hey, how are you doing?
Hey, Mike.
Hey, what's going on? How are you? I'm good. How are you? Good. Not much. Busy.
No. Oh, test? Yep.
No, we're going to integrate it as part of
Test. Okay.
All right, well, good evening. It is 6 p.m. sharp. I'm going to call to order our regular meeting of the Murrieta Planning Commission. And then we'll start off, Madam Secretary, with a roll call. If you could please do a roll call for determination of a quorum.
Thank you, Chair. Chair Vrooman.
Here?
Vice Chair Wojcik. Commissioner LaPaglia.
Here.
Commissioner Beam. Rose.
Here.
Commissioner DeSena.
Present.
Let the record reflect all commissioners are present with the excused absence of Vice Chair Wojcik.
All right, which moves us on to the Pledge of Allegiance as we celebrated our 250th anniversary as a country here a few days ago. Let's stand, please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Right hand over your heart, ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, it moves us on to the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda, Madam Secretary?
Seeing none.
Okay, I'm looking for a motion and a second to approve tonight's agenda. We'll do that electronically.
Yeah, I'm having a technical difficulty.
You want to do it by roll call? I'll take a motion and a second.
I'll make the motion to
I'll
approve
sec-
tonight's agenda.
I'll second it.
Okay, we've got a first and a second. Go ahead and register our votes if the.
It's down completely.
Okay, well, we got, all right. Got the motion to adopt showed up electronically. Here we go.
Motion carries unanimously, 4-0.
Okay, very good. Next goes to public comments. At this time, we'll take public comments. Any person may address the Planning Commission on any subject pertaining to city business which does not relate to any item listed on the agenda or the consent calendar. Normally, no action may be considered or taken by the Planning Commission on any matter not listed on the agenda. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. Madam Secretary, do we have any non-agenda public comments tonight?
Seeing none,
Okay, thank you. Then we're moving on to the approval of minutes. And tonight we have the minutes of approval, actually past 3 meetings, April 22nd, May 13th, and May 27th, 2026 regular meetings. So with that, are there any members of the public requesting to speak on the approval of the minutes?
there are none.
Okay, and then looking for a motion, we can do a motion for each one individually or with all 3 meetings, if everyone is comfortable doing that. And if you've reviewed them, then I'll go ahead and look for a motion and a second to approve all 3 in one vote.
I'll make a motion. I'll second. I'll second. I'll second.
There we go. I'll wait for it to show up electronically.
Motion passes unanimously, 4-0.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's move on to a business item. We got a minor resolution to determine that a vacation of a portion of Washington Avenue is consistent with the general plan. Mr. Hitch, welcome this evening, and look forward to hearing what you have to share with us.
Good evening, Chair Ruman and Planning Commissioners. Don't appear here too often, but tonight I have an item here that needs some attention from this commission. So again, my name is Jeff Hitch, the city engineer here with Marietta. Tonight we have Downtown Marketplace, and it's a right-of-way vacation. The Downtown Marketplace project is the project on the corner of Calmia and Washington Avenue. That project's actually been under construction for some period of time. You've probably seen the stick building, or the building that's being erected there, steel structure actually, and it's well underway. The project was approved as Development Plan 2018-1741 on February 4th, 2019. It's a 51,000 plus square foot building, the mixture of retail, office, and restaurant space. It's on a 1.66 acre parcel, again on the southeast corner of Washington, Calmia. There is a condition of approval that requires the processing of dedication and vacation of rights of way as it becomes necessary for the project, and this project requires a portion of the Washington/Calmia, I'm going to say, right of way to be vacated as part of the project. And we're going to kind of walk you through that briefly. This gives you the overall site plan with Washington Avenue over there on the left side, Calmia running across the top. The building itself is indicated there, proposed 4-story retail building along the face of it, along the Washington Avenue side. Obviously, the parking lot is on the kind of on the back side. This is an exhibit, the excerpt that comes out of the downtown specific plan that shows the right-of-way of 80 feet, which is what's required for Washington Avenue between Calmia and Ivy Street. So it's a 80-foot right-of-way or a 40-foot half-width. Notice it has the angled in parking that we have in the downtown section. So this is now a kind of a revised excerpt from that same overall site plan. You can see the project building there. The different colored lines you can disregard. Those are utilities that needed to be relocated as part of the exhibit. What is pertinent here is that hatched in area that you see there. That is the excess right-of-way that we have. We currently have a total of 55 feet of right-of-way along Washington Avenue. The original concept for Washington Avenue was that it was the idea for Washington from the downtown section all the way to the south, all the way down to Temecula, in theory, was to have been an arterial roadway, which would have been 110 feet, which explains the 55-foot current half-width that you have. That has been downgraded many years ago, and the idea of that arterial is no longer going to be, especially given the fact that we demoed the Washington Avenue Bridge across Murrieta Creek many years ago. That's not anticipated to be the case anymore, which is why the downtown area now has only an 80-foot right-of-way designation. So this is simply excess right-of-way that's left over, an extra 15 feet. And as you can see in this exhibit, there's in the gray area here, there's a couple of areas that are kind of hard to see. I don't have a pointer here per se that I can point to, but you'll notice there in a couple of dark areas in there within that gray area, there's building columns that are from the actual building itself. So those building columns cannot exist within the right-of-way, so the right-of-way does need to be vacated, the extra 15 feet. So we would be leaving we'd be leaving the remaining 40 feet of right-of-way, which is necessary per the specific plan. This is an excerpt of the plat of the plat associated with the legal description that shows the 15-foot dedication. When I said earlier about Washington and Kamia, there is a sliver of the chamfer between Washington and Kamia that would also be vacated along with that. So that's the actual legal portion of the property that's being proposed to be vacated by the development. So with that, and I think to add to this, the reason this is coming now before you, this Planning Commission probably has not seen this come before you in the past when we've done vacations. The reason we're doing this is it's been brought to our attention. It's something we probably should have been doing all of these years. And the purpose of this comes out of the government code, where the government code requires the Planning Commission or the planning body of the agency to determine whether or not a vacation of dedicated right-of-way is in compliance with the general plan or in conformance with the general plan. So what we're identifying here is that this right-of-way is the remaining right-of-way that we're going to have left is 40 feet half-width. That is consistent with the specific plan that is there. So we're committing in this case that this project is in fact in conformance with the general plan. So the recommended action here tonight is that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution determining that vacating a 3,181 square foot right-of-way easement on the frontages of Washington and Kalmia Avenue of a portion of parcel 3 of parcel map 7704 is consistent with the general plan. With that, I'm available to answer any questions that you may have.
I'll turn to my colleagues. I'll start at the end. Commissioner LaPaglia.
I have no questions. It seems pretty straightforward. A part of a property that we no longer need, and it's consistent with the specific plan and the general plan, so it seems pretty straightforward. That's all.
Mr. Rose.
I don't have any comments. Seems like I agree. It's just pretty straightforward.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I share the same sentiment.
And just a quick question for you, just because I drove through there and took a look. Obviously, the area that's being vacated or proposed to be vacated, there's a sidewalk there anyway. So, and the building does kind of encroach in there, and there's a portion of there that's a right turn only lane, and that's sufficient for traffic circulation. It doesn't need to go any deeper, any further back, or it really can't without changing the driveway that goes into where Anthony's and where this building is right there. So that's sufficient in your opinion as far as the right turn?
Well, let me go back to perhaps this exhibit. So this exhibit, you can see where the driveway is there on the bottom of the picture. That's the driveway that goes in and out of the Anthony's. So we are removing a portion of the right-of-way. The sidewalk is actually outside of the gray area that we're talking about. The existing sidewalk is in the white area to the left of that, so that actually sits within the existing 40-foot right-of-way that's there. So the back edge of the sidewalk is actually the start of the portion that's being vacated, so 15 feet from there onto their property. There were some existing utilities that were there. The developer has removed all the utilities that were the city's utilities. And there was another utility, I believe, that was owned by Spectrum, I believe. And that utility was also relocated by the developer out of the right-of-way, and the utilities have all confirmed that there is no utilities. That's not really part of what we're talking about here tonight, but just to give you the background, that's all been addressed.
Okay, that's all questions I have. Thank you very much. Now, it's not in the script here, but do we need to open it for public comments? Yeah. Madam Secretary, do we have anybody wishing to speak on this item?
Seeing none?
Okay, so we will open and close the public comment. Now I'm looking for any discussion before, okay. Motion and a second, please.
I'll make the motion to approve.
I can read the recommended action if it
Sure.
pleases the chair.
Absolutely.
So the recommended action, as listed in the staff report, is adopt a resolution entitled, "The Resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Marietta determining that the vacation of a portion of Washington Avenue is in conformity with the city's general plan."
And I will now make that motion to approve.
I'll second that motion.
Motion carries unanimously, 4-0.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hitch.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Yep.
All right, next we'll have a public hearing, the reintroduction of the Hillside updates. DCA 2021-2396 to amend the Marietta Development Code Title 16 for the purpose of revising and updating chapters 16.08, 16.14, 16.18, 16.22, 16.24, 16.28, and adding new sections 16.24.080 entitled Exceptions, also 16.24.090 entitled Reserved, and 16.24.100 entitled Hillside Overlaid Map, continued from the June 10th, 2026 Planning Commission meeting. Are there any members of the Planning Commission that wishes to abstain or recuse themselves from this item?
Chair, will I announce this now, Carl?
It's up to you. You have no legal obligation to at this point, so you can wait until it's voting time to determine how you want to address that, or you can
Okay.
deal with it now.
Well, I'd
however.
like to, I guess, disclose or say that I wasn't here at the last commission meeting, but I did review the very long meeting on video. And I've been here for multiple meetings prior to that. This has been going on for some time. So I'm very well versed and have a good understanding of the Hillside Ordinance and I think what we're trying to achieve here. So I'd like to sit in on the meeting and give my 2 cents, my opinions, listen in, hear what the public has to say, hear what the city has to say, and then determine if I'll vote or not. I guess I could do that later. Okay, so that's all.
Okay, very good. Staff, maybe we have a staff report.
Yes, thank you, Commission Chair and fellow commissioners. For those out there in the audience online, my name is Chris Tracy. I'm a senior planner here with our Advanced Planning Division. Some of the requested actions tonight is to reopen the public hearing, accept public testimony, and adopt a resolution. We're going to forward your recommendation to the City Council from there. There's some existing challenges and proposed improvements with this ordinance. The existing challenges we're trying to address here are inconsistent application of standards. We've had manual error-prone calculations in the past, ambiguous definitions, and this led to confusion for customers and staff. So some of our proposed improvements here are automated and clear calculation methods, precise and modernized definitions, better workflows, objective data, and that sort of thing. What we hope that this will achieve for everyone is just a clear direction for property owners, staff, and the community as a whole as it relates to the Hillside regulations. So touching back on May 13th, when we last met on this item, on the left side is kind of the Planning Commission feedback, and we also had some stakeholder feedback too. First, with the Planning Commissioner feedback, one of the comments was no rounding of average slope calculations. And this was also based off of public comment too. So for example, if someone has a slope that's at 24.3%, we're not rounding down and we're not rounding up, it's just gonna be 24.3%, and that's how it will relate to the hillside classifications. Also, there were some needed additional definitions for developed, undeveloped, and agricultural uses in the context of hillside development. That's kind of described in your staff report, but I'm just noting that here. And then from the stakeholders, staff received feedback under the purpose section of chapter 1624 to replace encourage with reasonably considered in more of an objective manner. So that's, staff concurs with that thinking, and it's reflected now in the ordinance as well. Just some illustrations of developed, undeveloped, and agriculture improvements as it relates to those new definitions as noted in your staff report. For the next two slides, I'm going to walk through these slowly. The Planning Commission can consider any of the parameters to allow further development without a hillside development permit. However, hillside development standards would still be in play. Exempting properties from the hillside area overlay would require further analysis by staff. So if there's a carve out altogether of a property, for example, that would require its own analysis. For the first portion here, kind of the activities, flat work, pools, and similar improvements within a previously developed area. If it's less than or equal to 50 cubic yards of earthwork, this is essentially the size of a swimming pool, it would be exempt from a hillside development permit, provided the work occurs in a legally disturbed portion of the site, or there's another qualifier in our municipal code that would exempt it, such as in our grading ordinance. Grading within a developed portion of the site, and it's greater than 50 cubic yards, this is typically reviewed under the city's grading ordinance. A grading permit is required unless the work qualifies for an exemption as determined by the city engineer again. And then we also have a third category, fine grade and drainage review. This is less than or equal to 50 cubic yards of earthwork, required only if the grading ordinance mandates the city's engineering review. Sometimes it otherwise would be exempt from a grading permit. However, there's a qualifier with all this. If a property is altering the drainage of the site, it usually will trigger a grading permit. If they're doing like slope embankments or stuff like that, that would also trigger a grading permit. And if it were like less than 50 cubic yards. So those might be some scenarios. Rick Alzaga can speak a little bit more to that, but just wanted to qualify that. The next three categories here are accessory dwelling units. We don't have a size threshold, but it's triggered over 50 cubic yards, proposed for a review, such as a grading permit. The grading permit's tolled in that case until the approval occurs for the ADU. The accessory structures, if it's 1,000 square feet or greater, or equal to, I should say, it requires a hillside development permit, and this mirrors our development plan permit requirements citywide. So for example, if you have a property on Nutmeg in Washington and in the flatter portion of the site, of the city, and it's 1,000 square feet or greater, it requires a development plan permit currently. And then for agricultural improvements, we don't have a threshold base, but for example, if someone installs orchards, vineyards, grazing, or things of that nature, it's not considered a developed condition by itself. These were some other cities and counties out there that have thresholds relating to hillside grading review. For example, San Bernardino County, if it's 500 cubic yards per lot or 2,000 cubic yards per project, it does require a hillside grading permit review. And this only applies where natural slopes are 15% or greater, and a grading permit's required. City of Moraga up in Northern California, they require a hillside development permit and design review at greater than 200 cubic yards. It starts with a design review board, and then if it's on slopes greater than or equal to 25%, it then kicks up to Planning Commission or Town Council review. Lafayette, which is up in that same East Bay area, if a property falls in a hillside overlay district, they have this mapped out throughout their city. It automatically triggers a hillside development permit. If it's less than 200 cubic yards, it's an administrative tract. It goes through a staff level review. If it's more than 200 cubic yards of disturbance, then it kicks in a discretionary public hearing tract. So those are just some examples out there. I just wanted to throw that out there, for comparison purposes. We've kind of touched on this in the past, so I won't go into too many details, but this is kind of how many properties we have in different classifications, undeveloped and properties owned by the RCA and that sort of thing in the Hillside area. I have these for further discussion when we get into site examples, so I'm just going to skip through that. And with that, we're going to open the public hearing, accept public testimony, and adopt a resolution as noted here on your screen. And with that, staff will be happy to answer any questions and go through any scenarios as well. I do have a couple of scenario examples if we need to go there.
Okay. Anything else from any of your colleagues at this point in time? You good?
I don't know if Rick has any comments or anything.
You don't have to. We can move on. I just wanted to give you the courtesy in case you did.
Yeah, actually, Mr. Chairman, could I chime in?
Sure,
for you?
absolutely.
Having been through a number of workshops at the city council level and vetting, and discussing this particular topic for a while. So I think with respect to the developed undeveloped question, there hasn't been a discussion at the council level about it, giving any direction to staff. And I know at your last meeting where we covered this, you asked us to massage this particular topic, and so what I'd asked Chris to do was to identify standards from other cities where there might be more than or a higher threshold than 50 cubic yards to trigger a permit. And I know the council respects property rights. Staff does as well. I think that's embedded in our processes and procedures. And I think with an eye toward that, the commission has the ability tonight to recommend a threshold of when it believes a property owner should go through an additional review, like the Hillside Development Plan that Chris referenced. I don't think there's like a magic number of how high or low I think the threshold should be. I think the standards that you've seen from us tonight reflect our current practices with respect to grading plans, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to follow that. Other communities, I think with a nod toward customer service or trying to reduce bureaucracy, whatever you want to call it, they've had or established higher threshold levels. You can certainly, do that. One area of discussion, I think, has been like how much work or grading or land alteration, can a property owner do while kind of staying outside of the bureaucratic process, like through an application review, coming to the Planning Commission, and just kind of really staying at a plan check level with staff over the counter. We would still enforce the standards, but we wouldn't require a zoning application review, which can be lengthy and expensive and cumbersome. So if you have any ideas or you want to talk to staff about what kind of threshold you might be thinking of or you'd like to establish, kind of what I go back to is like if somebody has an existing home and they want to do a room addition, what kind of a review do you want that person to go through? Is it administrative staff level, or do you want them to come to the Planning Commission? So that's kind of providing a really brief synopsis. Chris, can you go back to the tabulation slide? Yep. So when we first started to talk about this topic, one of the things that the City Council asked us to do was to kind of give them a sense of properties within the Hillside overlay that had been developed, properties that were owned by the RCA or other conservancy, and so you see that data in front of you right now. So hopefully that gives you a better understanding of the affected areas that we're talking about. There are roughly 319 parcels that are privately owned and developed. And so those are really the parcels that we're talking about when you are discussing a threshold here tonight. If any of those folks want to do an addition or other land alteration those are the 300 parcels that are going to be affected by your, discussion and recommendation of the city council. And so there are 51, remaining parcels that are largely undeveloped. And so while there's been discussion about whether or not we actually need the overlay, I think we've said before that the general plan wants to have oversight over our hillside areas. And what that looks like is why we embarked on this process. So just to give you a little more context, and again, if you have questions about thresholds and what trying to right size, whatever that is, we're happy to support you in that discussion. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chantarantsu. That very helpful. I know this has gone in front of us, gone up to council, back to us, back to staff. And I think the last, when we sent it back, it was, when I looked at it, there was a word that was in there. It was not necessarily undeveloped, but undisturbed. And so we needed to clarify that because, in my opinion, if there's any vagueness or things like that, it's problematic for staff. When someone comes into the counter and they're left to kind of guess as to what things were thought of maybe years beforehand, those type of things like that. So, we're not going to get it perfect, but I'd like to get it close to perfect and make it easy for anybody coming into the front counter to go, okay, we know what to do in these instances. So that was kind of the thought behind it. And I met with, I think, Mr. Tracy and Mr. Steele after that meeting, and brought up some of the concerns that were brought up by some of the speakers last time, specifically both Mr. Longs and Mr. Klein and a few others. And so, okay, how can we make this better and make it a little bit more, have some clarity? And so it's come back to this point, and I think it better addresses some of those definitions and things like that. So very appreciative. With that, I'll turn it over to anybody else, any of my colleagues. I'll start out with Mr. DeSena, Commissioner DeSena. If you have any questions.
Yeah,
Staff.
thank you. So I do have some issues kind of still. I wasn't there the last one, but I did. It was a very long document, which good. We need that clarity. But as I see it, policy is supposed to give clarity, right? We need it. I think we do need to get it precise. I do think we need to get it accurate so when people come forward, they know. So some of my issues with it when I was reading it over was taking citywide policy and specifically applying it to a few within the map, but some in the map area are going to be disturbed. So that's first question. And I'm proposing that as far as something that came up for me, but maybe you can address that.
Well, as far as being disturbed, I mean, are you speaking to 100% disturbed or maybe partially? Because I did do some analysis with some examples that are, within the overlay right here. Maybe that'll help kind of with the discussion also. So, using our polygon tools that we have with our GIS, I was able to determine, for example, actually this is probably a little bit better illustration. The one on Linnell here, you have about 22% disturbance. As you can see, using aerial imagery, you have a lot of chaparral, natural elements like boulders and things like that. You're at about a 22% disturbance overall for that site, and the remainder 78% is not. So that would be kind of more of an extreme. A lot of the ones I found were more about 50%, maybe in the 60% range. Example, the one on the bottom's been more disturbed at 42%.
And just to help a little bit with some perspective here, the current ordinance would require these people to get a development plan. What we're trying to do is help people with an easier process.
Okay.
That's what's before you.
Well, I think it's more about we look at large scale developments in these areas. that would be of a concern. So like small property owners are lumped in and add a layer of burden in order to develop. So that's something I saw in there. This is on top of like the other constraints that are already present, like MSH, CP, and so on and so forth, that other parcels won't have or don't have. Many lots will not be able to provide grading prior to cityhood permits. They weren't required prior to the cityhood. Permits weren't required for agricultural grading. So I just think it adds an extra layer to it. So kind of where I was looking at it as my recommendation for it is recommending we are clear that disturbed land, including agriculture, under 5 acres are exempt.
As a threshold, you're
Yes.
proposing 5 acres or less being exempt from a hillside development permit?
Correct.
Okay. That's,
I guess, what are your thoughts on that? And I'll share something too. He's not here tonight, and he was here the last time. Alan Long, he called me this afternoon, and he brought up that same, I didn't know, that same, is this, smaller lots, larger lots, and had there been some other consideration with staff over that, or is that maybe you can kind of explain, what are your thoughts or perceptions on that?
maybe that example from the city of Moraga,
Okay.
let me go there. I'm sorry, Lafayette. So in this example, if it's less than 200 cubic yards of disturbance, so that's like 4 swimming pools, if you think about it, it goes on an administrative track. It's pretty minor in scope. That's kind of where they landed on in terms of requiring a hillside development permit in that jurisdiction. If it's 200 cubic yards or more, then it's kind of more of a, it goes to a public hearing at that point. So that's kind of where they drew the line as far as kind of those 2 tiers.
So based on amount of dirt moved as opposed to the size of the lot?
Yeah, in that example, that was, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, like Lafayette, they obviously set a standard for their city, and, that gives a great example. I just, looking it over, because of the grading permits in the past and, where we were at, you have a lot of homes in that area or that were affected by that or will be affected by that. So kind of setting that threshold before or under the 5 acres, I think would be something that is important to me personally. Well, not personally, I have no stake in it, but reading it over.
And Commissioner, as we talk about agriculture, is your vision that it would be active current agriculture, or it would have been at some point in time in the past?
At some point in time in the past, it was that, but now it's been developed different. So these are like small development, small property owners that are in those areas that I see, at least when I'm looking at this, would or could heavily be affected by this.
So just point of clarity again, properties currently are required to have a development plan if they're in the hillside overlay. So all the properties before you currently have to do a development plan. We're trying to come up with criteria to basically make it easier for the mom and pops and those property owners we're talking about. And we're trying to figure out the threshold of who needs to do a development plan and who doesn't. Okay. So I guess your pitch is if it's 5 acres, they don't need to do a development plan. Is that essentially what you're saying?
Yeah, essentially, because what I'm seeing is like you're taking this citywide ordinance or this map overlay and it's applying it to some areas within it.
Well, right now it applies citywide, and we're shrinking that down where it speaks in the general plan of those resources. That's.
So would it be something that you can propose to shrink down anything under 5 acres then?
What, I'm sorry, I'm trying to follow your reasoning.
So the reason is that you've got these houses on land already. They have 5 acres or less because there's 5, 10, acres or plots of land. And to make it below that threshold of 5 acres is basically it. So not the 4 swimming pools you're talking about and 200 cubic feet.
If Chris could show the examples. So essentially staff's approach at this point is if you've already impacted an area, so like the example here, if you want to take the one, either one, yeah, fine. The one on Duster is a good one on the bottom of the page. Most of that parcel has already been impacted as far as we can tell. So if that person wants to develop within that space that's already been developed, they're not going to need to get a development plan. That's staff's approach. If they're developing, say, up towards the top there, you can see that it looks like there's an area that they probably haven't impacted before. That might trigger the need to do a development plan. They still have to do everything else. Everybody always has to come in and get a building permit. They have to get a grading permit. If the engineering team says they need a grading permit, all we're really talking about is whether or not they need a discretionary permit. Currently, that person, if they develop in there, has to come in and get a development plan. We're trying to come up with criteria to basically exempt out their existing areas, which is what stakeholders have been asking for and what was discussed at City Council. And so like the examples here and staff's approach would exempt out most of those parcels. And I think Danny Long spoke to this at the last hearing. He said, he really wants clear criteria as to how we exempt out properties. We've brought that to you.
When you say most, though,
You can see.
but you use the word like most, right? It would exempt most properties.
So if you're disturbing an area and you're under 50 cubic yards, say you're just scraping it and you're putting in, I don't know, a casita or something in the back, that would get you out of a hillside development permit as what Carl was referencing there. So we're trying to make this an easier process for people. If it were today, they would have to go through this discretionary process for an area that was already disturbed. So we're trying to make it easier is the idea.
Chair, if I may chime in, on that note, on that specific development type, building an ADU or something like that on area that has not been disturbed, that's something I could see we should increase the cubic yard threshold to like 200. Originally, I was kind of thinking it wouldn't make much of a difference, but if we're talking about like individual small single-family lots, you could disturb 50 yards pretty quickly. 200 would be a lot better. We could even increase that to 400 if we want, but again, for that specific example, I would recommend we consider that, but go ahead.
No,
So if I may interject, so as Chris mentioned, my name is Rick Alzaga. I'm the principal engineer. I just want to interject some thoughts from an engineering perspective because I'm hearing discretionary permits, 50 cubic yards. So I want to clarify just a couple items when it comes to us, whether we require a grading permit or not. To address the agricultural, per our code, one of the exemptions is grading performed for agricultural purposes in connection with the raising of crops or animals, but not including grading or building or structures that require a building permit. So it just depends on the project. And to give everyone some perspective, 50 cubic yards, if you can just imagine one of your bedrooms at home, a 13-foot by 13-foot bedroom is 50 cubic yards, almost the right number, or 11 by 11 by 11, however you want to see it. But that's roughly 50 cubic yards. So 50 cubic yards can happen quite quickly. Now, that's just our ordinance, and I see the references to other cities. And, those numbers, we can discuss those and maybe agree to some other number. But for now, we go by the ordinance, which is 50 cubic yards. And there's a couple other triggers that require a grading permit or exempt you from a grading permit. And it just has to do with what you're doing with the dirt, how you're going to grade it and what have you. When it comes to a building, though, we do not count what's under the building. If you're a mile high and you put your building on top of that, we don't count a single yard. It's what happens around it. And there's other considerations as far as drainage. If you move the land around and now you've altered the drainage courses. So again, there's just a few variables that we look at. And I understand the hillside ordinance and I understand what planning is trying to do. But even if there is no discretionary permit requirement, engineering has to look at it and determine, is a grading permit required or not? And that is for safety reasons, drainage, so you don't, drain onto your neighbor, et cetera. And so I just want to provide some input on that, and I'll hand it back to planning.
Well, question, if I can, Chair. Rick, so on that note, like if it were to come across engineering's desk and it was a drainage issue, how would the engineering department handle that? Because that's a serious thing and it should be handled, right? It's hard to believe that someone would want to, improperly drain that would destroy other property or whatever, but I understand that it could happen very well. Is that something that just can be adjusted over the counter, or would that need to have all kinds of, I don't know, engineering done?
So if it's a quote drainage issue, unquote, I think that implies there's some grading involved. So we have to look at what is that?
Sure. But you could grade, you could move 20 yards and create a drainage issue.
You could. Generally, they're somewhat minor. And when you're talking hillside properties, they tend to be larger, and people don't always build right on their property line. They're somewhere in the middle. And again, so every project is unique, but it can exist where you can have a situation where it is a drainage issue. And so what we would do, we just isolate it, and we look at, so let's just say grading is going to be not necessarily exempt. We have something in between, what we call fine grade and drainage. And the difference is a grading plan, a grading permit requires a licensed civil engineer to stamp those drawings. A fine grade and drainage was created by the city so that residents could get a grading permit without having to hire a licensed engineer. But it still requires some level of information. How's it flow, how steep, those sort of things. And we work with residents all the time on doing that. And then there's the exemptions. So it can occur where they're more likely a fine grade and drainage. And then when there's an impact to the actual natural drainage course and somehow they're altering it, I require not a hydrology report, but more of a hydrology analysis. So again, I just need to see some level of something, what you're doing, so that we understand what's being proposed and it's still safe for your property and your neighbor's property. So there's some in-between areas that we are always working with the residents to try and come up with something that is not full-blown hydrology studies or full-blown water quality studies. Because keep in mind, when ADUs get built or even single-family homes in these remote areas, then you're talking the driveways and all the things that go with that. And we are unfortunately bound by the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit, right, the NPDES permit that we know of. And when you start doing driveways and the accumulation of impervious area, now we're talking water quality stuff. And it's just another report that it's just the world we live in now. And it is a supplement to the hydrology study. So we have to look at it, we have to address it. And when I say we, it's us and the residents. And those, we don't have a way to have the citizens do it. They all require a licensed engineer to do those. So it's a mixed bag. And when it comes to just engineering, aside from what's being discussed as far as hillside, how we view a property down on the flatland and even on the hillside, we view it very much the same.
Yeah. Thanks for that insight. I appreciate that. And I didn't mean to really get off topic. We were talking about, 5 acres or less, having a exemption. And then I just commented about maybe we should increase the yardage that we grade that for an exemption. But I can understand where Rick's coming from. Like, you move a little bit of dirt, it changes drainage, and that kind of triggers other things. But to get back
Can I
on
provide
topic.
just a point of clarity?
Sure.
Because we're kind of getting into two different things. So, and I appreciate the principal engineer's position. So what's before you tonight is really an ordinance about whether or not you need a development plan using the development code. What Rick was talking about is there's also other triggers where you need a grading permit. That's not before you, but that factors into the discussion. But you don't have the grading ordinance in front of you. So we're bound by the grading ordinance, and Rick's a great resource, and he'll be able to tell you what's in the grading ordinance. But we're here to talk about when a development plan is required or not within the hillside area. That's pretty much all it's before.
This is probably a silly question, but give us a definition of what a development plan is.
So it's our discretionary permit that when you build anywhere in the city that the ordinance says you need it, then you have to get a development plan. So for example, it used to be almost anything in the city required a development plan, even a single family home. We changed that a few years back, except in the hillside area, you always need a development plan to do development within the hillside area. You also need it obviously to do commercial buildings, apartment buildings, all these apartment buildings under construction in the city, they all have development plan permits. It's a discretionary permit. Sometimes it comes to you, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's approved by staff. Sometimes it's approved by the planning commission. There's various different types of them.
Okay.
I think the only thing I want to know, like from you guys, because experts get it, is doesn't it, if we lump them together though, like with larger scale developers and like the smaller individuals, doesn't that cause like an undue burden on these smaller properties as opposed to larger scale development or developers?
I mean, so what I just said is we used to require everyone to do a development plan in the city, and that's a fact. We only changed that when Jared and I got here on regular single-family lots. But it's something that the city's required in the hillside area since we've had a hillside ordinance. So we're actually trying to make it easier for people right now. We're trying to exempt out areas so that people don't have to do a development plan. The way it currently sits, if we walk away tonight and do nothing, people still have to come in and get a development plan if they're in the hillside area. All of these property owners that are wanting to provide input on this, they're still in a crummy situation if we do nothing. So we're trying to help and create criteria that makes it so people can get their areas exempt that they want to develop. So, for example, the ones before you here, if the person wants to knock their home down and build a new home, if you adopt the ordinance that we're putting in front of you, they don't have to get a development plan. They just move on to the building counter and submit their building plans, right? Because they're building within their developed area. That seems to make sense. We've had long discussions with the city council about this. That's essentially staff's approach to this. And that will make it easier for most people. The question really before you is, what do you want to do with the outer areas?
That's what I was just going to say.
The areas outside, like if you look at these pictures, the one on the top's a good example. You can see that's like a hillside on the right, and it's got a bunch of chaparral on it. You want to exempt those areas and just let people nuke them since they are already there? Or do you want to control that area and say, well, your development area is where you've already developed. If you want to go into that area, yeah, we want you to do a development plan. That's essentially the question in front of you.
And I think that's the threshold that we're talking about. Yeah, I think it's very clear, and I think you make a great point, and it's very, very clear that the previously developed area is a shoo-in. Like no, there's no reason that we should have to go through a development plan and go through all those hoops to do that. But it's this gray area where portion of their property is developed, the portion that's not, they want to do something, and like, what's that threshold? 50 yards of grading, 100 yards of grading, development plan, no development plan. So, yeah, obviously that's the topic here. But
Yeah,
to get back on track, go back to your question, and I'll wait my turn for the rest of it. I'm
No,
sorry.
that's fine. And that's what I was talking about was that little, the other part of their property, right? Because if it equals, 5 acres or less, and it includes that hillside of it, well, now they might not be able to develop on that. So creating that under 5 at least gives that to
Well,
them.
they can develop on it. We're just telling them they need to do a development plan that meets with the criteria of the hillside ordinance, which is why we have a hillside ordinance.
Okay, fair enough.
Can you put that Mary Place property back up? That, I'm very familiar with that street over the years, so that's actually a really good example. So, so those homes right there, they're kind of terraced into the hillside a bit, and where they're graded, whether or not they were, how they were graded or whatever years ago, 30, 40, 50 years ago, or whatever it was. And so, and it's landscaped below it, and some of the landscaping, below the home, it's a mobile home, and it's above 25%, you can tell. Now, it's been disturbed because it was part of that. So, but looking at this, you can, in your example here, it's 2.85 acres, and then vast majority of it, 2.29, has been disturbed. So I'm taking that pretty much everything, probably 80% to the left of the natural hillside is what we're talking about.
Correct.
That natural hillside, if you just say, if you make hey, anything under 5 acres, it would exempt the entire piece of property, and they could encroach into the hillside and build whatever it is. And all we're saying by this, if I understand it correctly, is the ordinance would really control that one portion of the property that has, that's obviously never been built on, never been disturbed.
Right.
And it's above the 25%.
Right.
And so that would require a development plan, but anything that they want to do, if they want to knock out their mobile home, knock out maybe regrade that slope, and maybe they want to put a bi-level home or something like that on something that's already been built, that's not going to require a development plan.
No, if it's outside the overlay, some of these lots have a split, line through their property, I should mention too. So, if they're going in and scraping an area to put in another, a room addition or they want to rebuild it and, as it is written right now, if they're 50 cubic yards or less, it doesn't require a hillside development permit. Now, if we want to raise that threshold, that's fine. Or, I think that was just a starting point, but that's kind of how it's laid out currently.
So using this example again, because you mentioned ADUs, let me just throw that little mix in there. So let's just say on this piece of property, somebody wants to put an ADU and they want to encroach into that area that's never been developed before. So tell me what the process is with that. How would that be different than if they wanted to put and extend some of their primary residence property over there?
Well, if it's going into that area, we'll have aerial imagery. We're going to look through, we're going to go through history and take a look at that. It's going to require a hillside development permit because you're in that threshold.
So regardless if it's an ADU or they want to expand their primary residence and the fact that the dirt has never been moved before,
Right.
It's going to require a development plan. Everything now requires a development plan, so if they wanted to do something on the left half of their property, it would require a development
Correct.
plan.
Yeah.
This ordinance would basically exempt the greater part of the 80% of that out of it,
Right.
and only include that portion that on the slope there greater than 25%.
And yeah, and if I may, I mean, the idea behind that is that sloped area on the right, and we want to make sure that they do it right. Like the way they develop it, that they develop it consistent with the hillside criteria. And they don't just go out and nuke the hillside, which is what people don't like driving down the freeway, the adjacent city to the south right now, right? So that's the idea, is to control the development that occurs on the slopes. That's the whole point of the hillside
So we're not saying
ordinance.
that they can't develop it. It has, obviously there's.
Sort of an extra level of
Yeah.
review.
Chair, it's going to come down to economics, because if you want to put an ADU higher than your house, that's a driveway, it's a lot of grading. We're going to require a 100-foot fuel mod around that habitable structure. You're going to get in the coastal sage scrub. There's some biological factors. So the economics for most of these mom and pops, they're probably going to develop in the disturbed areas. DeSena, you point out the bigger folks, yeah, they probably want to come in and put some larger buildings, but the constraints that are in Los Alamos are you have limited water and sewer, you have limited road networks, you have a lot of constraints in the area. So I think everything that you just said, Chair, is absolutely what we're going to probably see, is folks are going to go for the easier to develop portions of their property. But I don't see someone, unless they really have a lot of patience and time and money, to put something that far up on their property. It's a significant endeavor to come through us on those types of actions. But we'd be happy to work with folks that use the disturbed areas in their property.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I could just add maybe some color to what Commissioner DeSena is commenting about. So Chris had the kind of like the summary table of like the developed and undeveloped properties. 90% of the properties that are developed are 5 acres, less than 5 acres. So what would happen is, 90% of our hillside areas would go outside of the existing overlay zone, which I think, would create some issues with the city's general plan. And I would suggest that the better approach is trying to find a way, like where is the threshold that could be set where property owners aren't necessarily penalized for being in an overlay zone, but like how much buffer can we give them, so to speak, so that they can develop without having to go through this bureaucratic process, as long as they meet the hillside standards that we can follow administratively.
Could you just explain for a second, when we talk about development of a property, I understand an ADU, I understand tearing down someone's mobile home and building a new one, but what's the development part of that?
So with our hillside zone, it's going to be residential project. So, if it's an undeveloped lot that can't be subdivided into more parcels, the expectation is that there's going to be a single family home. If they can figure it out, they could do an accessory dwelling unit as well. For larger properties that, that are over 5 acres, there's a potential for, subdivision into more parcels if they can meet emergency access and utilities. And some of the other criteria was mentioned, habitat, issues. So like we do have a few projects right now that are in hillside areas that are processing subdivision maps. So they'll take a larger parcel and subdivide it. I think one of the projects is 10, single-family lots. So that's the type of development we're talking about. It could be one single-family home, and then depending on the property size, it would be multiple single-family lots.
We're not talking about hundreds of development units.
No, the majority of the properties in the hillside overlay are zoned RR, which is our least dense zone. It's 2.5 acres to 1 unit, so we're not talking about significant development within these areas compared to what folks are seeing out there just down the street, right?
Any more questions?
Yeah, I'd like to hear some public comment. I'll save some questions after that. But actually, while we have staff, can you go back to slide number 2, I believe, where it talks about like an auto calculation? Automated and clear calculation method. Like, that just kind of seems like it blankets everything. Like, the calculator didn't spit out the right number, so you're done. Can you
more like
elaborate on that?
We're using GIS, and we touched on it numerous times. I apologize, I should have been a little bit more specific there. We have GIS and mapping tools, and then we have that CAD-based alternative if there's a disagreement. So an engineer can provide their own data, through AutoCAD, and Rick's team would take a look at it with us, and we determine, okay, you're either, at that threshold or not.
Okay. All right, that's all I have.
Can you maybe share that just for the public benefit of what what you're able to research back? Obviously, we can go back in city records since we incorporated back in 91, but obviously a lot of that history and some of these hillside areas go well beyond cities incorporation. And what information can you get from the county and how far back records, and maybe you can kind of share some of that process, that if someone were to come in and into the front counter, because again, trying to eliminate red tape, and the easiest answer is always no, right? So how can we say, okay, yeah, we're going to go ahead and research this parcel, this piece of property, and then what tools do you have available in order to find the answers for somebody?
So I'm going to help a little bit, and then I'll let Chris respond. So I used to work for a county, the adjacent one. The county has a lot of records. So every county has a county assessor. There's a county assessment record. As a property owner, you can go get your county assessment record. So all of us that are property owners, you can go to the county, ask for your county assessment record. That will show you when your buildings were assessed. Oftentimes it has a permit number on there from when your building was built that's on your property. There's a lot of good information there. The counties also have aerial photography. They typically have a GIS department that you essentially just have to go ask them. They'll bring out the old plats of their aerial photography that they took, in part because they were always snooping to look and see what things people were building, right? That's what counties do. So there's a lot of good records at the county. Obviously, the county was also in charge of subdivisions here for a long time. So there should be, the old subdivision maps should be there. If we don't have them, county should have them. They're still a county record, even though they exist in our county. So there's a lot of really good records at the county. Oftentimes, when we get into these types of discussions with property owners, it's a matter of explaining to the property owner, you can go to the county and get this information. Now it's up to them to go get that. The city don't ask them for that. The property owner would need to do that research. And I'll kick it over to Chris.
Yeah, just along those same lines, I mean, there's also historicalaerials.com. There's other, Esri has a bunch of resources we can use as well. There's just so much data that's out there that we can help reference, in making that call, if it's been disturbed or not. And we want to help the homeowner get there with the right information.
Chair, I've done a lot of research. I was at the same organization. I love looking through microfilm because a lot of building permits back then weren't technical. It was just a half a sheet with a box checked and an address. We would take that as evidence of record. So very simple information from the 1950s to the 1980s, but I've always been able to rely upon a building permit record, which was a very simple document. I think that's the beauty in those old records. It's not like an EIR where you have to sift through a lot of documents. I've been really happy with some of the stuff that I've been able to use. In addition to historicalarrows.com, that thing's a treasure trove. Especially in this city, we found some stuff from 1936 that helped us understand that there was an agricultural runoff ditch. It wasn't a river. It was just a ditch that some farmers created, and that helped us get to the right place. But we do like to do that research as planners. If the county doesn't have it and we don't have it, there's other ways to get to the bottom line on that.
And
Yeah,
if I
'cause
may add to that, just one, from an engineering perspective, what Jarrett was saying, the simple documents that people would get to go build something. So we kind of got the short stick on that one, because when it comes to engineering grading plans, we really don't find them, the old ones. And people want to do something on their home right now, and that home has been there for 40 years or more. And we asked for, do you have the original grading? It doesn't really exist, and even if it did, what was required back in those days is not what is required today. So it's very lacking in information. So we're challenged that way from an engineering standpoint. As far as from the surface, it's great because you can see vegetation, it was there, now it's not there, that kind of stuff. But when it comes to grading, obviously that's more, there's depth in that, and it's very difficult to get that information from the old drawings. So I just want to mention that as well from engineering standpoint.
Yeah, I'm sure, back in the day, there was a lot of people that just bought a piece of property and did their own grading, and nobody really cared, right? So it is what it is. Well, thank you for that, kind of that history there and what you can get, because in hearing from my colleagues here that, a lot of the concerns are really that Joe homeowner under 5 acres wants to do something, make some improvements to his property. That's one thing, as opposed to, somebody wanted to put something on and make it look like the Hollywood Hills and up against a steep hillside there, and that's something completely different by a large scale developer, right? So, okay, be interested to hear what speakers have to say. So at this point in time, we'll open up public comments at 7:05. Madam Secretary, do we have any public comments stating with proponents, opponents, and then those neutral in that order?
We have Dan Long.
Mr. Long, welcome again.
Thank you, Chairman Vrooman and members of the commission. I appreciate you taking the time to hear me out today. A lot of things to cover here. I'm going to try to do it as succinctly as I can. First, again, I think we've come a long way. I'm a little exhausted. I almost didn't come today. It's wearing me out, and I'm not even doing the work. So Chris and staff, just commend you for your work. On the same token, I still think we still can improve upon it. At the last hearing, I ran out of time. I gave a picture of the infamous Great Wall of Murrieta that we're all aware of on the corner of Murrieta Hot Springs Road and the 15 freeway. This is where my frustration comes in at. I was a part of the GPAC going back in the early 2000s, and there's a lot of things in there that really didn't get enforced. And I'm going to go ahead and say I don't think we really carried out, the city where we are today didn't really carry out the vision of that general plan. You look at that project there. There was no slope along Murrieta Hot Springs Road. That was manufactured. They built that wall and then backfilled dirt into it, which is about a 40-foot wall, and then a 4-story building on top of it. So all the city can see it when you drive by. It's terrible. I'm not going to mince words. It's terrible. We have several lots that are 2.5 acres that are up against the hill at Hogback. If you measure that from Los Alamos Road, which is a rural county road, it's about 1/4 mile. And you're talking about a 2-acre parcel. You're not going to be able to see it if they develop up into the hillside. There's going to be a retaining wall. It's going to be much minor than a huge development. I'm not sure how large the Greystar project is. I should know because we actually own that project, my company, at one time, and we're proposing a development on it. And I can tell you we were not proposing a huge wall along Murrieta Hot Springs Road. In fact, we had commercial at street grade level trying to work that project in, It didn't work. Greystar took it over, and God bless them, they're building a project, and I support that. But it's frustrating as a homeowner and a landowner that we are getting held to a standard that is really not fair, is what I'm trying to get at. So, Commissioner DeSana, thank you for mentioning the 5 acres or less. I support that. Commissioner LaPaglia, the 200 cubic yards, 400 cubic yards, I support that. I'd like to see us give as much flexibility to us homeowners. I'm not a big corporation. I own 4.6 acres by myself. My family and I, we share a lot that's about 2.5 acres. That's it. I used to own the hogback on the top of it. I don't anymore. I have no equity stake in that. So I have no stake in the game on the top of the hill back. I want to be very clear about that on the record. But I do own a home mid-slope on the hogback, and I may want to build a new home on that one day, and I want some flexibility. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Chair, I just wanted to add, though,
Okay, next speaker.
There are no more speakers.
Okay, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing, 7:09.
Mr. Chairman, I usually, if I could interject real quick.
Yeah, sure.
So I usually don't want to comment after the public has commented, but I think the context of the Terraces project where the wall was referenced is important. So I always appreciate being able to kind of criticize the state for its poor policies. And that's what happened in the case of that particular project and why that wall wound up being so high. So the state has preempted the city's ability to limit density on projects. And with that particular project, they had proposed some affordable housing units. And so that basically gave the developer the ability to essentially waive the city's development standards. And so that's why we wound up with a wall like we did. It's the city's obligation to let affordable housing developers develop property to the maximum density, and the only way they could do that was through the construction of that wall to raise the grade on that site. And unfortunately, that's the level of intervention and lack of local control that the state has given cities to control development in their cities. And I know that's a reason why the city council last night was discussing a constitutional amendment to reestablish local control, is to try to prevent those types of things from happening in communities that just disrupt and make the community less attractive. So.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. And I think that's on the same lines of what I was talking about, which is the large people coming in that get to take advantage of these state things that you guys are dealing with headaches of. They're going to get the stuff approved. They're going to be able to do it. We can't stop the state per se, or at least we're trying to, but we can't at this point. So then you have these property owners who are raising their families. They're just, trying to do it. They're going to be held at a standard, which, okay. But if somebody comes in that's large, they get to just do it. We do have control at our level to minimize as much as possible, because then once we're being held to the standard as a landowner, right? To say, okay, well, the state says they can do it. They're going to be able to build this wall that we're talking about to put high density on it. But what can we control? We can control what we do with the individuals ourselves then, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the Hillside Ordinance is a measure of local control where the city council, the planning commission and the city council get to set policy on what hillside development looks like, within the city. And, whether or not the comparison to larger developers, where that fits into the discussion is for the commission and the council to sort out, not us. So you got a tough job, and I appreciate the way that you're going through it.
So let me ask you, since you brought that up in theory, and of course, I've brought it up several times, everybody hates that wall, right? And because it's the entrance of our city to get off the freeway, and this is what you see. And this is why I brought up several times about making sure that the landscaping on there, is going to grow and it'll mitigate it somehow. But let me ask you this. If this ordinance had been adopted, let's say prior to that project, would that project have looked any different as far as could it have been, or would we have been able to terrace it back further, more of a step, more steps to where it would have pushed back the buildings further and it wouldn't be such a steep hill?
No, to what Director Chantrangshu was talking about, essentially density bonus law trumps the city's code. So once they invoke the density bonus law and they're doing affordable units, they can exempt or waive city's requirements. Whether we have them adopted, we had them, or we have the new ones, they could have exempted themselves either way.
Even a steep hillside like that, they can manufacture that and require that.
If they're doing an affordable project and they're utilizing the density bonus law, which
Yeah.
that project was.
Even
Chair,
these
the-
changes that we're proposing today, somebody could, if they wanted to come in and build and they qualified for that density bonus law, could go get around some of the things that were in
And
there.
that was my next question. So this protects to some degree, but doesn't protect to every degree. So,
There's one exception in there for public safety.
Right.
Where we can put up a fight.
right,
We did that last year with a developer who was proposing a road that was in violation of our standards, and we were arguing that it was a public safety risk, and it was quite a fight, and HCD got involved, and so the developers are trying to squeeze every concession they can get, and the state is, for the most part, coddling and allowing that, so. We're a little stuck, but we do have that one argument, so.
okay, and so a couple other follow-up questions since you brought up, and it has to go with Commissioner LaPaglia had brought up, and of course, we're bringing up cubic yards, and it's not my area of expertise, and moving dirt, those type of things like that. And we've got other cities that, do what they do, but by changing that or making some modifications to what we're looking at tonight, we have established code, do we not, that what, if we were to somehow make modifications to that, would it be inconsistent with the code that's already adopted by council?
So I would defer to Principal Engineer Alzaga, but essentially, I'll bring you back to the starting point again. You're just looking at the development plan side, so you can't change the grading ordinance. So as Principal Engineer was talking about, there's still going to be a criteria for a grading permit that will get triggered either way. You're just looking at when you think the development plan permit should be triggered. Maybe you're comfortable with the scenario that, yeah, someone's doing 100 cubic yards. The grading ordinance triggers a grading permit according to Principal Engineer Alzaga. So someone's going to do a grading permit, but you don't want them to get a development plan. So you say 100 cubic yards, we don't think that needs a development plan. So but they're still going to come get a grading permit. They're still going to do their building permit. They just don't need to do the development plan in the hillside area. Or as I think Commissioner LaPaglia said, a threshold of 200 cubic yards. You thought, looking at the other cities, maybe that was reasonable. You could throw that out there, but you're still, all you're doing is telling that person, whoever that is, they don't have to get a development plan permit, but they're still gonna have to get everything else. They're gonna have to get a grading permit, they're gonna have to get a building permit, they're gonna have to do all the other things. It's just the criteria of when they need the development plan permit.
Right, and that was a little bit of my premise. Like, there's other mechanisms to trigger the building, developing a safe building development, ADU, whatever you want to call it. Then that doesn't require, or that doesn't really require you to have a development plan. You're still going to have to get a grading plan. You're still going to have proper hydrology. You're still going to have to meet building and safety. Like, all these things are in place to make sure that someone doesn't build, an unsafe, terrible looking ADU on the hillside. So that was a little bit my point with that. I want to just throw this out there and get some feedback from commissioners and staff. Could we draw a line that excludes single parcel, single family home additions or developments? If Mr. Long or whoever owns a property over here has a previously developed home and wants to add a garage or an ADU or whatever, that they would be exempt from the hillside ordinance. Still applying it to somebody that wants to come in and build a multi-home, multi-family zoned property or something like that.
So I go back to that photo, that overhead of that Mary Place.
Yeah.
So I guess if they put the garage or they put something on that portion that has been undisturbed or undeveloped, the issue is by what you're asking, then they can do whatever they want on that portion of it? Or are you saying, yeah, if we want that portion protected, then the ordinance applies? So it really goes down to what they want to do on the small property owner on the existing portion of their property that's been developed, and what they want to do versus the portion of the property that falls greater than the 25% and in, that one little sliver there on the right-hand side of the screen there. So
I guess just a point of clarity, like Chris was saying earlier, remember the entire parcel may not be in the hillside overlay.
right.
Like the example of the Mary Place, which, the chairman's familiar with that neighborhood, the lower part of the lot may not be in the hillside overlay. It may just be that upper right side. So you want to be careful you're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? Like if we're trying to protect the hillside and the only thing that's on the property that's in the hillside overlay is the undeveloped area, to get back to what Director Chantarangsu was saying, that's kind of what we're trying to protect. Right?
Understood.
So what I'm saying is if you want to exempt, if you exempt it, then you exempt the whole piece of property, and then they can do whatever, and they can encroach into that hillside.
They can't do whatever. They are just not held to the hillside ordinance.
Yes, with all the conditions and the aesthetics and those type of things like that.
Correct.
Do you want those aesthetics in, or do we want those aesthetics and those other type of restrictions in that one little portion of that property, or do we not? That's really what it boils down to.
Well, I think we talked about in a previous meeting that when we develop, right, if I've got this correct, it has to meet certain criteria, like it has to look a certain way, natural.
Yeah, it can only be so tall, things
So
like that.
tall. So we're talking more, I think, when I look at this, so yeah, the sliver or whatever it is, when we look at like single-family homes who just want to develop on their thing, because some of these houses, these grading, the disturbed land happened many, many years ago. So if we want to give them that sliver, that's what I'm proposing. That's what I'm in support of, and I am saying that, LaPaglia, is like giving that portion to the landowner, because they still have to meet all your guys' criteria that's there, just they don't fall under the hillside ordinance.
Well, if some of that criteria is in the hillside ordinance, I think we're intermixing the concept of the hillside ordinance with the development plan permit. The development plan permit is a subset of the hillside ordinance. The hillside ordinance contains some of those objective standards for development on a hillside, and I don't think we're talking about getting rid of those. I think what this conversation has been, with some confusion, is about whether or not an applicant has to come in for a development plan permit, which is the discretionary approval part of it. The objective, ministerial stuff, the grading permit thresholds, the height restrictions, all of those are in play whether or not there's a development plan. The question here that we've been discussing is, at what threshold do you need a development plan? And the development plan is what's going to put it before this board or before the director, depending on the threshold of it, to review and make sure that that some of those less objective criteria are being met, to prevent things. For example, this wall that we keep talking about next to the freeway there in Hot Springs meets all of the objective standards of how to construct a wall and the technical requirements and health and safety requirements and all that, but we don't like the way it looks. That's a discretionary component, and that's the thing that got taken away from us by the state in that. We still have that here. The question is, at what point does somebody have to come in and get that discretionary approval? If they're on that parcel that you're looking at, if they're moving, if you say that we're going to exempt the development plan from the hillside,
Yeah, I don't
can
actually
look any
think,
way it wants
I
to
think if you
look.
listen to my recommendation with under 5, I'm establishing that point correctly, is that where do I want that line to be? Under 5.
Under 5 acres.
Yes.
Right, but 5 acres has nothing to do with what's being built or what, so you're not even going to look at what's going in on a 4-acre parcel at all. It
long
doesn't
as it
matter how
falls.
much dirt they move, how much they cut into the hillside, as long as it meets objective grading standards, we don't want to look at it, which is fine, but I'm saying that's where you're going. The hillside ordinance, which is what made me interject here, exempting from the hillside ordinance is a whole different thing, which I would not suggest you're talking about. I want to focus back on the difference between development plan permit, exempting from a development plan permit versus exempting from the hillside ordinance. And those two terms have been used interchangeably during this conversation, and they mean very, very different things. So I think what Commissioner DeSantis, what you're getting at is 5 acres exempt from the development plan permit, right? Not exempt from the hillside ordinance.
No, I disagree with you.
You want
That's not what I'm
the,
talking about.
okay, so what you're suggesting would mean that if you have less than 5 acres, you don't have to comply with any of the standards in the hillside ordinance?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So that's
Other
what
than
you're suggesting?
What is already there, like the habitat and all that other stuff.
All right.
That's already in place in what you are explaining.
So we're clear on that, those are different
We are
things.
clear.
I think he's made his position clear on that. It would exempt all development under 5 acres from anything in the hillside ordinance whatsoever.
Correct.
Any of the requirements, heights, amounts of dirt, I can't even get it, Chris can. address it if he wants.
MSHCP,
Yeah.
consistency,
Any of that.
habitat.
Which my legal suggestion would be absolutely not, I would not recommend that. That creates a whole host of other problems with the code. If you want to go that way, that would mean revisiting a lot of things. And certainly is a direction you can head in. But I do have to caution, that's very different from exempting from a development plan permit.
Commissioner DeSena, were you under the impression, as I was, like, just because we're exempting or proposing to exempt the 5 acre or less from the hillside ordinance does not exempt them from everything that city attorney just talked about? Like, they still have MHSCP problems and everything else, not problems,
As
but
the same rules would apply as to a non-hillside, they would just be a regular parcel.
Which I actually said when I read
Right.
it. My thing-
Anything having to do with a hillside would be gone. It would just be regular parcel standards. But hillsides are different, so that does change things.
No, I get it.
There
I
are some
did say
things
a
in there
lot.
you may want to keep, some things in there you may want to exempt, but throwing the whole thing out would just say, if you build on a hillside, it's the same as if you build on flat land.
right, which
correct.
just seems already heavily regulated, which
But it's not the same thing, right? A hillside is different from flat land.
If you think about it, the city to the south of us has a major development on a hillside. Do you want that
I can't think of that.
situation everywhere?
no. I just don't see, like, of the 391 parcels or whatever, like, how likely that is. Of the 371 parcels that this applies to, or whatever the number was, how many of them are never going to be developed, which I know in 40 years from now, we want to protect this. This is what the portion of this problem is, but how many of those are going to turn into commercialized, developments like we have down the street in Temecula? I just don't know how many of those, and you guys can comment on that. I think, David, you had a number that you said earlier about how many parcels were single-family lots under 5 acres. So how many of those are we vulnerable to becoming some massive, ugly development that would scar the hillside?
Yeah, so the universe of lots that the hillside overlay currently applies to is, I think it's roughly around 380. 290 of those are under 5 acres or less. And so I had mentioned when I made my comment that one of the problems that we're going to have to deal with that the city attorney alluded to is we're going to have to, it's going to cause a problem for the general plan, which has policies about hillside preservation and protecting, slopes.
I would add just a comment here. The commission may recall from our training, you can build multiple ADUs now. It's not just one. And there's a bill, I believe, in front of the state right now to allow a duplex on every single-family lot in the state. So there's potential that somebody could build 5 or 6 units on their single-family lot, whether or not that's doable.
And that would be
with all the other
terrible.
requirements.
That would be terrible. But let me ask you this. If that's the case, would this block that from happening?
It
Or
could.
are our hands tied like they were with,
If-
Mount
if
Rushmore over
you-
here?
So what's before you, like we talked about, is essentially within the area that they've already developed, they'd be able to do that. They'd be able to build within the area that's already developed.
Sure.
But if they're going to go try to nuke the side of the hill, like the Mary Place example, if we exempt all 5-acre parcels, then they just roll in and they're like, well, cool, I get to keep my old house and I get to build 5 units into the slope, right?
Yeah, which is a
So-
concern because Commissioner DeCina, we have to think long-term here, 10, 20 years from now when these properties become more valuable and people start moving out here and the density rises and it's just, I like to think we can try to prevent that with some of these policies. And I feel like that's a big purpose of, having some of these policies is to prevent that happening in the future, not
Yeah, and
necessarily
just
today.
like and we're on the same page, but to clarify, they can still propose it.
Sure.
And they would go through the development plan process and we would review it and there would be discretion. And we'd want to make sure that they meet the standards of the hillside ordinance, that they design it like we talked about when we had the workshop with you a year or two ago, design it appropriately. Are we landscaping it? Are we doing berms? What are we doing to make sure it blends with the hillside, the grading techniques that Chris talked about, right? But if we just throw it all out and say anybody under 5 acres, then they don't have to do any of that. And like we talked about, they could cut the hill, build a gigantic wall, whatever it might be, right? So we're trying to control that development, that's all. We're not saying they can't do it. We're just saying we have existing standards. We have an existing ordinance that's in front of you. We're not creating it out of thin air.
Right.
We're just, we want to regulate that type of development. And that's what the city decided 30 years ago, right?
So,
Yeah.
so in your example, if, under that scenario, they want to come in here and do 5 ADUs on there. But by having the hillside ordinance and having some checks and balances, at least in the portion of the property that it applies to, they might say, we can only put 2 of them in. And so it would limit the amount of ADUs instead of 5, it might be only 2 based upon the ordinance.
That's possible, or it might steer them to develop in the area that's not already developed, so at least we preserve the hillside, I guess is what I would say, right? So at least maybe in the Mary Place example, they build down below and they don't build up on the hill where all their neighbors can see it even more, right? It's more in their face. Maybe it's down below, maybe they landscape a little bit better, and maybe it's not as disruptive to the neighborhood, but they're still gonna be able to do it because the state's passing these laws, right?
But can we be more specific with it? Like within this proposal, can we say like, if you want to build into the hillside, for instance, like we let that go? Can't you say, okay, you can only build this into the hillside, whatever this ends up being? Because realistically, what we're doing, at least it seems like to me, and city attorney, you can correct me again, is that we're saying that their personal land, their property, they cannot touch it. And if they want to touch it, they have to go through this whole process.
That's not what we're saying, and I'll let the city attorney chime in. That's not what we're saying at all. There's currently a hillside ordinance that applies everywhere in the city, full stop. It applies to everybody. We're creating standards that apply only to the areas that have the steep slopes, which is simplifying that application. And then we have standards that apply within that area. So they can develop, they just have to follow the hillside development standards.
All right, fair enough. I understand now.
Yeah, and if you want to go to a 5-acre exemption, it really means going back and redoing the entire thing, because everything that's considered in here, think of things like setbacks. There's different setback requirements from the toe of a slope. There are different requirements for retaining wall heights. And some of these are technical and required because it's on a hillside, having nothing to do with, and they're required now and they always have been. And they have health and safety impacts and requirements that are unique to hillside development. So I don't think staff is ever going to recommend eliminating everything from there. However, there may be other parts of this, and where this conversation started was, for example, the development plan which is something you may want to exempt people from to make the process easier, right? But you're not going to necessarily exempt them from, you're on a hillside, your slope is this, you don't have to meet slope requirements for a retaining wall. You can just meet flatland requirements for a retaining wall, which are very, very different things from a technical standpoint. So the concept that you're proposing would require kind of a wholesale review and starting over of this and coming back to you and identifying those specific sections that we really can't, or that staff really can't, and engineering can't agree to exempting hillsides from. They're here now, they always have been, and probably should always be, versus the things like a development plan permit, which maybe we can exempt or reduce the requirements or figure out that you don't need to do to ease the burden on the property owner. But we're not creating new burdens on property owners here. We're actually easing them or proposing easing them. Removing all properties under 5 acres from the hillside ordinance as it exists today and as it's proposed to exist creates a whole host of other issues. And for that reason, I mean, you're just making a recommendation at this point, but I highly suspect that if you do that, we're going to be going with a mixed recommendation to the council, which is not something we ever want to do. Staff's going to be pointing out all the problems with doing that, kind of tipping on the things I suggested, but going in more depth on that to the council, and then we're just back and forth again, and we still have the old one. So I'd really like to encourage you to hone in on the things that can help a developer without throwing the baby out with the bathwater and saying they're exempt from the whole thing.
Okay, yeah, I guess, and thank you again. I'm understanding it, so that I'm not trying to disrespect or step on anybody's toes. I think in my head, I thought, okay, they still have to go through the same procedure as far as going to engineering. And the engineering can say, no, this isn't good, this doesn't meet the requirements. Even if we don't adopt the hillside ordinance, they still fall under
That would be the plan. If we exempt them from the plan, that's what would happen. If you exempted them from the ordinance, then what would happen would be they'd be going to engineering, and engineering standards would be different. They'd be the flatland standards, not the hillside standards. So, again, I'm not supporting one threshold or another. You guys can decide whatever that. I just want to make sure we're all in agreement and understand what the implications of those things are.
Yeah.
So if you choose to go in a certain direction, here's the natural consequences of that. But if that's the policy decision, that's the direction we want to go.
No, thanks for the information.
Yeah,
I do
absolutely.
appreciate it.
And just a point of clarification, when you're using the term developer, it also is inclusive of the single-family homeowner, falls under that.
Yeah,
So-
we could say applicant, whatever,
Yes,
whatever you
I
prefer.
just wanted to make that
Not all developers
clear
are
that
big.
it's not a big home apartment developer, that type of thing like that.
Although it could be.
Yeah,
That's
no,
the
no.
point that that Steele was suggesting, is that there are some things we don't have control over as who will develop the property in the future.
No, I
So
get it, but just
be
when
prepared.
you use the term of, a developer coming in, and we're friendly towards the developer, I want to also be inclusive of the Joe homeowner is also fits in that. We want to be helpful to that person as well, too.
And it falls under rural residential, correct? That area?
Most of the properties are in the rural residential. Some of the hillside is in open space as well, which is a different zone, but most of the properties in the rural residential zone.
Can the state force like apartment complexes in rural residential?
I don't work for the state, right? I work for the city of Marietta.
I'm asking for your advice.
I mean, the state legislature.
I'm saying currently.
They've done crazy things, as we've talked about. I have to come, unfortunately, I have to come to you every year with all the new bills, and I know you guys roll your eyes, and it's a bummer, but.
I don't roll my eyes, I like that.
I do my best, but yeah, unfortunately, the state's doing a lot of really alarming things, and I mentioned the one that's in front of them now, to do a duplex on every single family lot. So not only are they wanting to encourage ADUs, but wanting people to do duplexes, right, on every single family lot in the state. So this is the stuff they're doing. They're trying to cook up more ways to get units on single family lots. They've said it at the legislature. So just be cognizant of what they're doing.
I want to make something clear for myself. I want this hillside ordinance. It's so complicated. It's so difficult to really understand. I want it to be easier for homeowners like Mr. Long here to build an ADU or a garage on his property, on his 2-acre parcel, on his 10-acre parcel. I don't want him to have to spend, him and all the other homeowners, to have to spend more money, more resources, more studies, more crap to build something that meets city standards, aesthetically looks good, is safe, all the other things. I do want it to be harder for someone to come in, like the people that built this ugly wall over here. I want it to be extremely difficult for them to affect our hillside. So that's my position. I don't know how we read that into the recommendation. If a developer comes in and buys a bunch of parcels, they should be held to a very hard standard for our hillside ordinance. But if these people on Mary Lane or whatever want to build something, as long as it still meets all the requirements I've talked about, I don't want it. I don't want them to have to go through another ordinance review and spend more money to have to do something like that. So I don't know how to make that happen, and it's so complex and confusing for me. So that's just my position.
Well, Chair, that's a theme that you've had this entire time, where you want to make sure that there's not requirements that can't be satisfied, right? Legal lot and history of grading. You want to make sure that the type of permit is affordable and is compressed in a timely manner. But I think those things are in front of you, and you can provide those as recommendations through us.
Yeah, I think that's the ordinance that's in front of you.
Yeah.
That's what staff's recommendation is. We've had this discussion with city council at length at multiple workshops. So we had a lot of discussion about this developed versus undeveloped and coming up with criteria. We've done that. We had a discussion about it at the last meeting. So that's what's in front of you, is essentially that approach.
Great.
If you have a development plan requirement, you have a discretionary review, and it comes before you to make a decide and make those determinations. And this is ugly, this cuts into the wall, this doesn't fit that, I don't like this. That's all part of that process in a development plan. It would be unconstitutional for us to say that property owner A has to follow these laws and property owner B has to follow those laws. The Supreme Court has found that corporations are people. It's the same, they're the same, whether we call them a developer, whether we call them a homeowner, whether we call them an applicant or an individual, the law doesn't see them any differently. So we have to treat them the same under the law. So the way we do that here is to propose that if you're making a disturbance of a certain size and a certain portion of the property, the undeveloped or undisturbed portion, then you need to come in and seek our approval for that.
And just to follow on to that, that may mean that there's a public hearing and that project comes before you, and that may mean that project goes to the city council, right? Mm-hmm. That's part of the public process. But if we just blanket exempt areas, that won't happen, right? So,
I agree.
So what's in front of you is what you just said. So if a developer were to come in and buy a bunch of these parcels and then try to develop within the hillside area, there'd be a discretionary permit. And if people still didn't like what they were proposing, they could ask for a hearing, and we would have a hearing here, and you would see the project. That's what would happen. So if you throw that away, you don't have that. So.
Well, there'd also have to be preemptively a change in zoning, right?
Not necessarily. If they get enough land, they could do it, right? They pull a bunch of parcels together. We, like Director Chantrasu said, we have a couple subdivisions in process that are within the hillside overlay. So it's true. So, I don't know why a developer would want to do it, but developers do crazy things sometimes. Maybe they really want to build a subdivision with a view of Marietta, right? And so they get a bunch of parcels together and they say, I like to build duplexes with 4 ADUs on each lot, right?
All right.
Yeah, and that's what we want to prevent. Right? Or
we want to
make more
review.
difficult.
We want to review.
Yeah.
Prevent was aggressive.
Yeah.
Review.
Question, Mr. City Attorney. Do I have the authority to reopen the public hearing for the purpose of allowing somebody who has not spoken before to speak?
Yes.
Okay.
We have not yet
I'd like to do
passed that point.
I see somebody who's about ready to jump out of his seat. I'll reopen the public hearing at 7:42. For the purpose of somebody who hasn't spoken.
I'm disappointed in myself for not coming to this. the original ordinance, right, protect the view shed from the 15 and the 215 and the major roadways, right? And how we got here, going way back, I mean, it's gotten way convoluted, right? Was my project on Jackson and Nutmeg that you could not see from any of those protecting a view shed. And what did we do to try to prove to the residents is we did a line of sight study, and you could still see the roof, right? So let's go back to the very beginning, and why are we making this citywide and protecting hillsides that cannot be seen from the roadways of the original plan? You follow? Right? So in the original general plan, in the original ordinance, right, was protect hillsides that you could see from the major thoroughfares. So if Danny Long's property is up a hillside, even if it's 25%, if it cannot be seen from the major thoroughfares, it should not be governed by the ordinance. It's that simple. Doesn't matter if it's 5 acres, 2.5 acres, or whatever, but we've gotten so far down the path, and not because of staff, right? It was, well, I'm going to exercise the better part of discretion. So let's bring it back to what the goal is to protect its hillside preservation, right? So it seems to me the simplest thing to do to protect the original general plan goal and private property owners is if you can demonstrate through a line of sight study that your parcel and your development cannot be seen from either of these thoroughfares, you're exempt. Doesn't matter if you need a development plan, a grading plan, throw all that BS out. It has nothing to do with the hillside ordinance or hillside preservation, because that's a blanket across the city. It's not only city or state, it's federal water, as Rick talked about, all these things. And I'm sorry, I'm frustrated, because after 6 years, and I think this is probably the 8th or 10th, and I appreciate the questions you're asking. I appreciate, Paul, the direction and clarification you're giving, Carl and staff, appreciate all these things. I'm frustrated because we've gotten way far afoot from the original goal, general plan goal and policy, and we need to bring it back and simplify it. And this is the easiest and most simple way for a landowner, whether it's a single parcel, a corporation, whatever, and for staff to figure it out. And someone doesn't have to come in and file an application. They can go to the general plan, look at the hillside overlay. Don't even have to do that. They can hire an architect to do and pick a point on these thoroughfares and produce a line of sight, come into the counter and say, hey, am I exempt or not? It's that simple. And that would be my recommendation to you, to make the recommendation, to add that recommendation that if you can provide a line of sight that you are not seen from the thoroughfares, it doesn't apply. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. We'll go ahead and reclose the public hearing at 7:45. Okay. You gave some historical information here. I'd like to give an opportunity for staff to respond to that.
Before staff does, I just want to make one further clarification to clarify even my prior statements. We talked about the hillside ordinance. We're talking about this ordinance, which is making changes to several different sections of our code. So whatever direction we go when we talk about exempting, I think it's very important that we talk about what we're exempting from, because there is no hillside ordinance in that it's one chapter of our code, everything related to a hillside. Some things are in the grading, some things are in the permitting section. There's different.
It's peppered throughout the entire ordinance.
Right. There are some consistent ones that are together, and probably what most people think of as the hillside ordinance. There's some sections that are specifically about that, but there are sections that are scattered about and completely different. So I just want to make sure we understand the terminology when we're talking about the hillside ordinance. We're just talking about what's before you today. there are hillside-related sections that are not in this ordinance because they're untouched. They're currently existing, and they will remain to be existing. So that part of my concern about exempting from this ordinance doesn't necessarily exempt you from all of the hillside-related things we've talked about. It's only the things that are being changed in here. So it's a broader discussion than just that, depending on where you end up focusing your attention on what you want to exempt from.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, you asked for, or gave staff the ability to, or opportunity to comment. And, you know, as we went through this reevaluation process, you know, part of our, you know, research was looking at some of the original source documents, planning documents from like the original general plan and what's called, you know, typically like the existing setting, you know, conditions. And it tried, what that document tried to do was to frame up the issue of the hillside ordinance for an ordinance to be developed. And for better or for worse, I mean, we've heard plenty of, you know, comments over the course of the last few years of, you know, misinterpretations, misapplications, you know, things like that. And the direction that we got, you know, from the city council was go clean it up. And so that's been our focus, is to not make wholesale changes to the hillside ordinance, but to try to clarify, you know, make it easier to understand. And, you know, the hillside overlay map, if you don't remember the story, we had a map that was hanging up in our office that nobody knew what the source of it was, who drew it, where it came from. And so it created a lot of confusion. You heard, you know, Mr. Klein's story about his project. And so we've tried to remove the ambiguity out of the ordinance by developing the overlay map, which Chris is showing on the screen now. So we're talking about kind of greasing the wheels. We've taken the mystery out of the evaluation process for property owners. If your property is in this overlay zone area, you don't have to do a survey, you don't have to do a topo map. We've already done it. And if you disagree with it, we've given a process, or provided a process where they could provide their own information. You know, we received testimony through the process that the approach that we used, you know, wasn't always accurate. So we're like, great, we'll give property owners the ability to do their own, you know, evaluation and have us consider it. So, you know, our guiding point has always been the general plan and looking at the back of the policies that originated, you know, in the first general plan that got carried forward. And, you know, essentially, and I'm paraphrasing a lot, you know, the goal was to, you know, protect slopes and have preservation of the hillsides for aesthetic reasons. You know, we've talked about the city to the south and what's happened there. You know, people aren't liking the way it looks. You know, Commissioner LaPaglia, you were talking about, you know, the number of properties that we have in the city and how you don't think it's going to happen until it does. And then we're all going to be looking at each other saying, how did we let that happen? Mm-hmm. And that's what we're trying to avoid. And so I think, you know, we haven't, like I said, we haven't interjected any new standards. We're looking for ways to be, you know, creative and trying to help our property owners, you know, get through our process. And we think the best way to do that is to establish a threshold, whatever you think is, you know, the correct one, where they get to work with staff as opposed to having to go through a bureaucratic process. So that's our position. We think that's consistent with the direction we've been given originally. And so you've got our recommendation, and however you want to, you know, establish that threshold for creating a development plan permit, you know, at a certain threshold or not. So.
Okay. I have a question for the city attorney. You advised, suggested, whatever, against the lot acreage of 5 acres, which I could like agree with, that it covers too many properties. I think it was like 90% of the properties.
I did not advise against that. I did for purposes of exempting from the hillside ordinance. If you wanted to exempt lots under 5 acres from a development plan, I'm not advising against that. I'm just noting that what that would mean would be there'd be no discretionary review of anything on that parcel. So if what they built, whoever it was that built, future property owners, whoever could build, would have no discretionary review. And if that's the direction, that I have no opinion on whether or not that's good policy. I'm just making sure we're clear on what it meant. But I was opposed to or advising against a wholesale exemption.
Okay. I want to try to find the finish line on this thing. Like, I really don't want to see this continued again tonight. Like, it's ridiculous that this has been for 8 years. I remember Mr. Klein's project. I was on the planning commission when that got shut down, repealed, or whatever happened to it. But what I was going to ask was, we were kind of trending towards, well, if we increase the cubic yardage allowed, but then we started talking about grading permits and all this stuff. But what would your thought be on like a square footage requirement, like anything over, let's just say 10,000 square feet of a building pad or something over 10,000 square feet would trigger the hillside ordinance?
So there are,
That and grading cubic yardage.
well, as Chris alluded to, there are other standards in the development code where a discretionary permit is already triggered at a smaller size. So accessory structures throughout the city over 1,000 square feet require a discretionary permit. So
We're talking about the hillside ordinance.
Anywhere.
Okay.
this is a different code requirement.
Okay.
But it's anywhere in the city, it's up there in the second level there. So that's the same throughout the city and in the hillside ordinance.
Okay.
So saying like, oh, you can do 10,000 square feet, that would create problems for those people that wanted to do an accessory structure because they would still need to get a development plan permit. So it really doesn't help them out.
Okay, so that's fine. And if that's the answer, I was just trying to come up with an idea that we can get a resolution tonight. You know, I don't know if it needs to be modified or what needs to be modified. It seems like we have some unhappy people about it, but overall, what you guys are telling us, it sounds like, you know, staff's done a great job and, you know, this is going to be simpler for everybody.
It's hard to thread the needle, right? We're trying to help
Understood.
people. I think a lot of the people that are concerned about this will probably have most of their properties exempted once they look at it, right? Once they look at where it's been previously developed and they look at their aerial photography and they show us and they come in and propose something, they'll likely probably fine. It's going to be the areas that no one's ever built anything. That's really where the question is, and we've talked about that at length. And that's what we're really mainly concerned about.
I think if you want to get it across the finish line tonight, you have to focus on those individual areas, or say we don't like it in its entirety and, you know, suggest, as we were starting to head, that, you know, we need something that exempts completely, which would be a whole redrafting. But if you want to work with this and try to get it done, you need to focus on individual points. Development plan, what's the threshold? Is it square footage? Is it grading
Cubic yards.
cubic yards,
Yeah.
thank you. Is it acreage of disturbed land? What is it and what's the threshold? You can focus on that decision, debate that, and come to something. If there's another specific point, we don't like this setback distance, or we don't like this retaining wall height, and you want to discuss that, that's certainly something that you can make tweaks and recommendations on. But if we're headed down the path of there's a consensus here to try to exempt everybody from everything, or everybody under 5 acres or whatever the threshold, that would negate all the rest of that, right? And require a wholesale revision and start over.
And just a reminder, the commission already took a position on this ordinance. We took it to city council. We went through workshops with city council. We came back to you because we changed a number of things in the ordinance. And so we want to make sure we get your recommendation mainly on the things we changed. The planning commission has already recommended the ordinance to the council as staff drafted it, what was it, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago. We've made some changes. The changes are before you.
Sure.
We think the changes are good and help the property owners and the applicants that will come in that will want to develop, especially the ones that already have areas that are developed, right? So we've kind of addressed that at the direction from the council. So we're not really looking to overhaul the ordinance.
I should be clear.
Speaking for staff, we're looking to bring back what we had before you before and show you the changes we made and then bring that back to council.
Yeah, I should be clear. Staff isn't going to, if you voted tonight, you know, unanimously to say we want the wholesale exemption thing. Staff isn't going to go back, redo that, do all that work, come back to that with the commission with that. What's going to happen procedurally is we'll proceed to the city council with your recommendation not to go forward with the current ordinance and describing what you do want. And staff would, put in their recommendation and the city council would weigh in on that. It wouldn't go back here and come back here again before going to that. So we're not stopping the train to do that, even if that's your decision. It just changes your recommendation.
Okay. Chair, what do you think? Commission?
I know I'm probably bothering you all on this, but
It's a messy process. You're fine.
so when Mr. Klein came up, he talked about the general plan currently, and I want to make sure this is accurate, stating about line of sight when it comes to building in the hillside. Is that still a part of the general plan?
It's still in the general plan. It actually, it speaks to it in several areas. There's other areas in the conservation easement that speak to preserving different, hills, and, there's a couple different policies. We covered this a couple of meetings ago, at that, but yeah, it's currently still in place today.
Okay, would this, what's put in front of us right now, would that affect it in any way?
It shouldn't, because what we are doing, well, let me go to the map, because
I think it might be more procedural. The way I heard the speaker state it was that you would do that analysis first, bring that to the city, and then request an exemption at the counter per se. That's how I heard that related. We don't have a difference of opinion on that process, but I would say that those hillside areas are viewable from many, many street systems. And so I don't want to create a new argument. I would like for us as staff to look at that on the way to city council to make sure that that is an existing reliable exemption to focus on.
Yeah,
But I think the misnomer is that we don't have a bunch of 10-story buildings everywhere in the city. And so I see the hogbacks in other places quite often from secondary streets and like that. But I want to maybe truth that out if we're asked to bring that to city council. But he's right. If there's an existing exemption, that's the right of these applicants.
To Mr. Ramaya's point too, and he processed one of the recent annexations, the size of the city has changed since the general plan was written. We've added a lot of space to the city. We've also added streets to the city. So the context is different now than it was then.
Yeah, and I clearly remember Mr. Klein's project and what I always thought that the base premise of this hillside ordinance was to protect the ridgeline view, so it wouldn't impede on views of the 215-15, like he said. And I thought it was and major corridors, whatever that means, Clinton Keith, whatever else. Have we just evolved away from that? Like, because it just seems like it's crazy complex. And, we haven't really even discussed ever in the last couple of commission meetings about like the view of it, like the ridge line. So can you comment a little bit on like that, I don't know, I guess that criteria and why we've gotten away from that?
Let me take a swing at that, Mr. Chairman, and Carl can chime in if he wants to. So, in terms of the layers of regulations, the general plan's like our Constitution, right? And the Planning Commission, City Council, the way that they implement or pick programs and policies that fulfill the general plan is through the zoning code. And so for the hillside goals and policies that were identified or written in the general plan, the mechanism that was chosen to get there, to achieve those goals, was the hillside ordinance. And so the city attorney, has indicated to you that if you go through this maybe alternate approach, we have to go back and undo 20 years of policy and rewrite this hillside ordinance. So we're basically, getting off the boat that we've been on for the past, 25 plus years with this ordinance, and we're going to have to rewrite it to go with a different, approach that you've been talking about. And so, as far as continuity is concerned, this approach keeps that continuity. If you want to consider a different approach, city attorney described the process that we would probably need to use to get there, where the city council will have to, decide, do they want to go back and, explore, like the approach that Mr. Klein was describing, or some other approach, or do they want to keep on with the current ordinance with the revisions and the updates and ideally the clarifications that we made. And I also want to, just touch on Mr. Klein's, suggested approach. I mean, it's got merit, but we don't have any analysis or backup to support that. And one of the things that we have to do is provide substantial evidence to you. We just can't say, oh yeah, that's a great idea, let's go do it, because it exposes the city to some of the issues that the city attorney described, where you can't treat, person A and person B differently. The goal, one of the main goal, and you're right, we have gotten, far away from it since we've started, was to try to clarify the map and get rid of the formula that's at the antiquated formula that's in there right now to try to determine average slope. And so by creating a map, we've taken the ambiguity out of that process. I'm a little concerned, without doing any analysis, that the approach that Mr. Klein is suggesting, without further analysis, that it's going to reintroduce that objectivity that we're trying to get away from. And if we want to spend more time, doing that, I think that's a decision that we're going to, have to take to the city council and let them decide. Did they stay the course, keep the hillside ordinance, and clean it up, or do we go back and reinvent the wheel and basically start over?
But the line of sight is in our city constitution already, in the general plan.
There's the language about the view shed, generally. And so, like I'd indicated, the vehicle that we chose to do that or to implement that is through the existing ordinance. Mm-hmm. And so there's no specific references to places within the city where, hillsides, should be protected, although there was a specific reference to ridge lines.
But, I'm sorry, just to interject. Protected
Sure.
from the view, right? Like, that's what we're trying to protect. We're trying to protect the view.
Well, if you look at the purpose of the ordinance, there are about 5 or 6 objectives, that are in there. And I don't know them off the top of my head, but, within the hillside policies, it's, trying to, maintain the views from the valley floors below. So you're looking up, from the valley floor below. I think is the language that's used.
Sure.
You're looking up at the hillsides, and that's the view shed that the general plan is, looking to maintain the aesthetic.
And I'm all about that. Like, me personally, I'm all about protecting that view 100%. I do believe that once the Temecula development is all built out, it won't look as bad as it does right now. It's so bare and there's no buildings, blocking the scar on the side of the hill there. So to their point, and to going back into the archives of this ordinance, the last 8 years, however long it's been, and I'm not talking about if somebody builds something, it has to meet our code, it has to be structurally sound, it has to have proper drainage, all that stuff has to be met. But if you can't see it from a main road or a main corridor, like, I know where Mr. Long lives, like, I've never been to his house, but I know right where he lives. I can't see his house from the freeway. I can't see his house from Los Alamos. So if you can't see like a development into the hillside, I don't mean to be like, what do we care? But it's really not, I don't really see like what the problem is. I want to prevent stuff from happening where it's extremely ugly from the view shed. I want to prevent that at all means. But that's where I'm just trying to find, like, how do you draw a line? And it sounds like you guys have put things in place that are making this mechanism easy to do. I just want to make sure that that is what we're voting on tonight, or that whoever's voting on it tonight.
Well, I think you've heard plenty of, testimony from staff and where we've pointed to areas where we're trying to improve the ordinance to, reduce ambiguity and make it easier to work with and understand. And so, the original task, that was our original task, from the council, make it better. It wasn't, go back, reevaluate the hillside ordinance and replace it, with something different.
It was taking it from the citywide to certain sections, correct?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Like
geographic areas?
Yeah, like geographically, it covered the entire city of Marietta. The hillside ordinance covered the entire, the entire city of Marietta, and now we've shrunk it down into these focused areas.
Yeah, so with the story about the map that I described, we've taken it from this, innocuous document to the overlay area, which is now, it's no longer citywide. It's focused in those areas that have.
It looks like
over
it takes up
25%.
15% of our city as a whole.
I think it's about 900 acres, something like that.
Sure. And then
Also, just one thing I like to bring up, we just brought back to you the objective standards, right? 3 years after we adopted it. This isn't like begin all end all, it's the end of the world. Like, we do need to get an ordinance in place. Just my 2 cents, we've been working on this a long time. Chris has put a lot of work in this. We need to get an ordinance in place to at least start helping some of the people who want to develop rather than have the current scenario. So there's a win here of just getting an ordinance in place.
I agree. I do not.
So just want to put that out there.
And I said it earlier, I want to see a finish line on this tonight. Like, you guys have spent so much time, so much money, so much effort on this.
We as staff are happy to continue to have a dialogue with the council and with the planning commission and continue to work with you on ordinances and updates. And we just did that on multiple things recently with you. So this isn't the end of the world. We can get an ordinance in place, start using it, and if there needs to be updates, that could be a request. The commission says, hey, come back and we'll have an update on how we're doing with our objective standards and our, I think you already asked me that, and also the hillside, right? And
Sure.
What development have we had? Staff, can we look at that and talk about that? We're happy to come talk to you about that.
Okay.
So
I like
let me
that
just
idea.
clarify something, just because, for 3 of us up here, we came in here midstream in the middle of this process, and I appreciate Commissioner LaPaglia has been here since the beginning, since all this basically happened here. And it's been back and forth for, you say, 8 years, right? Based upon, a piece of property, started the conversation and where we at, and what Mr. Chantarantsu had said, and how this all basically happened. So, when you go with the line of sight, you'd have to do some more research and like, okay, is this, how does that affect the general plan? Or what's it defined? But along the steps and you guys chose, or city council chose to say, okay, hey, look, rather than standing at different points along the I-215 freeway and I-15 freeway and standing on the freeway and looking and see what you can see and what you can't see based on development, you came up with this mapping system, basically, that we're in front of us here tonight, right? So, and that's been going back and forth. At any point in time, and that's the standard that was kind of set before we came up here. Did council ever say, yeah, we don't like that standard, we would rather you find different points on the freeway or line of sight and any of those type of things like that? Has there ever been a change in like, hey, we don't like the standard of the map? Let me ask that first.
Yeah, sure. So I think it was inferred through public testimony, but the council didn't direct us to change the way that we apply the hillside ordinance.
Okay, so you've been going down this road for years, basically. And so it's gone up to council as recently as several months ago, right?
Correct, yep.
Okay, and in that council meeting, the only thing that I gleaned from that or saw it came back was the developed versus undeveloped disturbed versus undisturbed. And that's what came back, and that was my point of clarification why I sent it back to staff, or wanted it got consensus and wanted it sent back.
Yep.
But prior to that, did council ever give any direction or say, hey, look, we don't want that standard and we want a different standard, and give you a different direction? Because we're going back within
Sure.
what the council gave us the direction, is what I'm believing is what's occurred.
Yeah, so, there was a time, in the process where we talked extensively about the hillside, overlay map. And there, we went through a discussion with them about how we developed the map, the technique that was used, all the technical, stuff that we did to basically create the map that's on your screen. And there was no discussion about using a different approach other than giving property owners an alternative to this map, which is to create, their own survey and topographic information that they could provide. So, they wanted to provide an option to property owners to determine whether or not they were, above or below the 25% hillside slope threshold.
So I guess my point is that if that's been the kind of the parameters that's been going on for 8 years, and to the Commissioner LaPaglia's point, get across the finish line, I suppose if there's a different standard that needs to be evaluated, then then council needs to be the ones to say, hey, yeah, we don't throw out the maps, start all over, redo it. I don't know. That's just my feeling, and what we have is what we have, but that's based upon the parameters set by council who told staff, and we're trying to, rather than throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and this is what we've got in front of us. It's basically, they're the ones that kind of set that standard. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you've been here the entire 8 years, and you've seen this, and I don't know, and the three of us are kind of newbies compared to your experience on the commission here, but am I missing something, or is that, or what do you think about that, or do we,
Think about what?
well, do we tell them, hey, look, no, let's throw a whole different standard, just do line of sight and throw everything out?
No.
Or is that council, that should be council's call to say, hey, look, we're gonna do a different approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't think that, I would want council to make that decision, because that requires spending a lot of time, which is a lot of money, to restart fresh on this. Like staff saying, we have to have something in place. This is still gonna go to council. This can still be mended if necessary. We can have a review or an update, like Mr. Steele had said, which I support that. This has been complicated from day one. It's been so hard to understand. It's changed so much. It's difficult. I hate to personally have to vote on something that you fully don't, maybe grasp or understand the implications of it. But I think staff's right, where we have to have something in place to get this to the next step. And if that's what we have in front of us, then that's what we have in front of us, and then city council can handle it from here. But staff's put a ton of work into this. They spent a ton of time on it, and it's been to our commission multiple times, and I think it's just time to just see this ship sail to council.
So then the only other question I have for staff, and I go back to that Mary Place parcel so let's just say, and you say you don't have enough information at this point in time in reference to the general plan. But I don't know if this parcel is viewable from Interstate 215 or not. I don't know. But if that property owner came in and said, hey, look, based upon the ambiguity, is it viewable from Interstate 215 or is it not? How would you, based upon if we were to pass this ordinance tonight, how would that, I guess it's a theoretical, because you don't really know, you need to look, but how would that factor into the process?
I'll just help, and then I'll let Chris chime in. It's a bit of a far-fetched kind of, we're getting out of focus here.
Right.
We don't know what's proposed. We don't know what they want to do with the property. But what's essentially before you is, as Chris did a very general analysis here, but most of the property would be exempt. Only that area, essentially, the scenario we're giving you, the area on the right that's going up the hill, that's the area we'd be like, okay, if you're developing in there, the development plan permit's triggered. The rest of it wouldn't need a development plan.
Well, I guess that would be something that if we were to move this forward to council and make them take a look at it.
Yeah,
And as you're doing your further analysis based upon the points of line of sight and things like that as to the, what we move forward, that would be something, okay, how would that be incorporated or not be incorporated into the process if somebody wanted to do
The only thing I'd caution on that, that's a general plan side, and this kind of city attorney
Yeah.
can weigh in. We're dealing with the development code.
Right.
What's in front of you is the development code, not the general plan. We're not amending the general plan.
The short answer to your question, though, is the map. So
Okay.
we're using our
Using
overlay
the
map.
map as the guideline,
Yep.
and basically that's the standard as opposed to something that might be a little bit more subjective.
The
Yeah.
general plan does not have specific standards in it. The general plan just says, there are these beautiful natural features out there, and we like them, and currently, I'll even read you the only part that's even close to any kind of regulation in the general plan. It says, the Marietta Municipal Code establishes guidelines for future development proposed along the city's hillsides. So it gives this broad statement that we have hillsides and we have these prominent features, even calling out some of what those features are, the hogbacks and the Santa Rosa Plateau. And then it says, we regulate them through the municipal code, which is what we currently do. There's nothing in there that says any kind of specific regulation that this is contradictory to or invokes. When we write these, we have to keep in mind that the intent here is to address these locations, but it is not prohibitive in any way.
Yeah, I'll just speak to like the view shed thing. It's a very complicated thing to implement. I worked at a coastal city. We had coastal zones with view sheds that were identified, but it was very defined, and there was always a debate between different homeowners, and it always led to a lot of consternation between what one was blocking versus another and protecting that view. I think this is, having the maps a little bit more defensible at the end of the day.
And Chair, I just wanted to say that you heard a speaker come up here very frustrated, admittingly, right? And then you heard Commissioner Paglia reference something that happened at a hearing a long time ago in Jackson. So because of the original error, this thing got bled into our development code so badly that every property got stuck with this. And so we would like to have an ordinance that allows us to have a fair way for developers to come in and develop certain properties that are not subject to hillside policy versus those that are. But I would say with Planning Commission, if you would let us go to the City Council, you would be fixing a big nightmare for our development community. So you'd get us back to a baseline level.
I suggest we vote.
All right? You wanna
Well,
make
you
a
need a
motion?
motion, but I second that idea, but somebody needs to make a motion before we can do that.
I'll make a motion that we vote on the action, the reintroduction.
recommended action?
Yes,
It's the staff recommendation. Would it please the chair? Would you like me to read the staff
yes,
recommendation?
please.
Okay. So the recommended action is to reopen a public hearing, which we did, accept public testimony, and then adopt a resolution entitled Resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Marietta, California, recommending the City Council authorize the filing of an environmental determination and approve Development Code Amendment to 2021-2396 related to chapters 16.08, 16.14, 16.18, 16.22, 16.24, and 16.28.
I think this is
just-
wrong. I think the motion and second is incorrect.
Yeah,
on
we
here.
haven't got a second yet.
We just have a motion from Commissioner Rose.
Second. Second.
Okay, and a
we
second by
just-
Commissioner DeSena. So just
So we
reverse.
just need to switch them.
Is that what, oh, no, that was an old vote, I don't know what's going on.
Oh, that's the minutes. That's showing the old one.
So we're not able to say, if you say nay,
Yeah, they're gonna take it to council anyways.
but we're not able to suggest basically to put something else in there.
You can if you.
And while she's doing that, I'll just remind the commission that
But we have a motion.
if you have ideas or future implementation that you think would be helpful, you can ask for it to be agendized on a future calendar to talk to staff about and see if it's something the council might be willing to consider.
When do you do
We're
that?
not set in stone.
Are you talking an alternative motion, or are you talking?
No, I'm talking about just like if 6 months from now so you have an idea and you want to bring it, you can bring it to
The process isn't
Carl.
working, and we need to
You
clean
want
things
to,
up.
you want to discuss something, you can ask for it to be agendized to reopen that particular topic. And
I think, and as we've talked about, we've been doing some trainings with you all. I'm happy to talk about this when we talk about how the ordinances are going. I'm happy to come back, talk about the objective standards, talk about Hillside. We can do that.
Okay, so we do have a motion, and still want a second as is? Sure. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Register our votes.
Motion passes with, let's see. Motion carries. I'm sorry. Passes with 3-2, or 3-1,
It's 3-1.
with the Commissioner DeSena.
Who voted yes and no?
So
That's okay.
DeSena voted no.
I voted no.
Dissent voted no.
He supported the recommendation, and then he voted
motion,
no.
right.
I didn't
on
know
the
how
motion.
to.
So he agreed to have it called to a vote,
Yes.
which was why he seconded the motion, but he voted against the recommendation.
Okay, just want to make that, it's not
It's
showing up
unusual,
on,
but it certainly can be done.
it's not showing up on our screen that way, so
Yeah.
that's why I,
It was 3-1 with Dissena, nay.
okay, got it.
Can I touch on that real quick? Or am I not allowed to talk at this?
At the chair, if you want.
Or you.
3 minutes? Okay. Yeah,
In
In,
your
planning
in your
commission
planning.
3 more
comments here.
spots.
yeah, 3 more
Okay.
spots. We'll wait 3 more
Okay,
spots.
so that carries. We're finished with that. So now we have city planner comments.
I don't really have any comments. I don't believe we have anything for the next hearing, so I just want to say happy 4th of July to everybody this last week, and hope you're all having a nice summer, and I think we'll probably have another meeting in August, but I don't think we have anything coming up at the next one. And I appreciate all the work the commission did tonight. Thank you. That's it for me, Chair.
Mr. City Attorney.
Nothing from me, thank you.
Okay, now planning commissioner comments. Commissioner DeSena.
I just wanted to clarify the nay on it. It was a little bit confusing on my end, and we were going back and forth quite a bit, and I didn't feel like there was things that needed to be added to it or needed to be addressed further than just tonight, like putting it out there and sending it to city council. So I did believe that looking at the general plan, looking at that line of sight we talked about, looking at how that all aligns, which I know you guys do, I'm sure you have done, but taking that a step further and seeing how that can be incorporated as an exemption to the process of it, if it falls under that. So I just wanted to make that clear, that I support getting this, through the finish line. I support, all the work that LaPaglia has done. I just, in my opinion, would like to see the exemptions of certain things if it goes with that general plan and it's there. So that's where I stand with it. Just wanted to let you know that.
Commissioner Rose.
No comment?
Commissioner LaPaglia.
Just appreciate all staff's work on this, especially you, Mr. Tracy. I know this has been a long road for you, so I hope that you see some success beyond Planning Commission here. And thanks for all your hard work to the entire staff, so thank you.
Likewise, even though coming in the middle of this per se, we've been there maybe less than half or a quarter of the way that Commissioner LaPaglia has seen this and the staff here. And so I appreciate all the hard work, the comments by those that came here tonight. And I'm sure as it goes to City Council that some of the comments that Mr. Chantarantsu mentioned about the general plan and also what Commissioner DeSena brought up as well too will get echoed to council, and they'll if they want to use a different standard, so be it. But that's clearly their call. So with that, looking for Consensus to adjourn?
Consensus.
Okay, we got consensus to adjourn. We are going to adjourn 8:27.